All right, so what was the banking policy? The use of credit to buy things, how that led to the stock market crash, how the stock market crash led to the Great Depression, what Hoover did, and then what Roosevelt did to kind of solve the problem. So during the post-World War I era, credit and installment payments were becoming very much popular. People bought things on credit, bought it now, paid for it later, and they didn't have to worry about payment. They even things that they couldn't necessarily afford were being able to be marketed to them now. Installment payments were also becoming popular, which meant that people could buy something that was a huge expense and then just pay it off over time. Obviously, with these things and credit installment payments, you had to obviously pay interest, and so that meant you ended up paying more than what the actual product costed. And people thought they were smart, so they decided to use credit and borrowing money and put it into the stock market. So they were hoping that the stock market profit would be greater than the interest rate that they had to pay on loans and the credit, and that was on surface level a good idea. They were able to get the profits of a stock market and make money there with very little capital. However, this led to a massive amount of investors that were uneducated into the stock market, and so they didn't really know what they were doing, and it led to speculation frenzy, which was buying and selling basically as a trend. They didn't have any concrete evidence to do something, and they were just following each other and just things that were posted that people stated would happen. Kind of like following a trend out. Now, if someone posts something, you do that, and so it did not end well. As soon as people started selling, everyone would sell. No one would want to buy then, and it just led to a stock market crash. Now, when the stock market crashed, everyone lost their money. Once they lost their money, they couldn't pay the bank back. And now the bank is getting worried. They aren't getting any of their money back, and people are getting scared that the banks are going to fail and want to take all of their money out. So the banks, in order to kind of recover from the stock market crash, what they do is they stop loaning out money. They hike up interest rates, they stop loaning out money, and they call for all outstanding debt to be paid back to them. Now, with them stop loaning out money and calling outstanding debt affected the Dawes Plan greatly. The Dawes Plan was the US's attempt at getting all of the war loans that they paid to the Allied forces, France and Britain, back. After World War II, France and Britain didn't have any money to actually pay the war loans back, and they demanded that Germany pay them reparations. But Germany didn't have any money either. So what the U.S. did was the U.S. paid money in the form of loans to Germany. Germany paid reparations to the Allied forces, and then the Allied forces paid the war loans back to the U.S. And it was a continuous cycle that was very scary, looking at it from a perspective years into the future, and pretty volatile, but it was working at the time. But once the banks demanded that they wanted all outstanding debt to be paid and they weren't going to give out any more loans, the Dawes Plan ended up failing, which only contributed more to the Great Depression and the failure of the banks. So now there's economic instability throughout the world. The US attempted to have American-made products be sold in Europe, and so that way American goods could still be bought and paid for, even though Americans couldn't afford it now. But Europe didn't want that, and European countries ended up putting massive amount of tariffs on American goods, and there was a lot of tariffs on European goods in America to promote domestic creation, domestic factories. So now no one can afford anything. Everything costs so much, and everyone everywhere suffered. It was not good. And Hoover, in the middle of all of this, wasn't really doing much. He was labeled as a do-nothing president. Any little thing he did do, no one knew about it because he didn't make it. He wasn't really good at communicating with with his people. There was an incident with the bonus army. The bonus army were Army veterans that were promised bonuses for fighting in the war, and they came to the White House to demand those bonuses be paid to them right now, but obviously America didn't have any money to pay those bonuses, so Hoover told his army to go take them off the premises without using any violence. However, they didn't listen to him and ended up resorting to violence and burning their tents and harming the Army veterans, which was a horrible PR stunt for Hoover, and it just painted him as a horrible president that was uncaring. And also, any little policy that he did try to implement, no one knew about it because he didn't communicate with the people. Hoover didn't want direct federal support. He didn't think that was constitutional. He wanted more volunteering than anything, and he wanted the state government to try to help. but there was nothing direct. He didn't provide help. He thought unemployment wasn't going to work. He thought it would make Americans lazy, and that if you're a capable man of working, then it's your fault if you can't make money. Now, Hoover was a bit different. Hoover obviously then ended up losing the next election of 1932. Everyone hated him, and it allowed Franklin D. Roosevelt to come to power. Now, Franklin D. Roosevelt had a lot more immediate actions and direct things. During the first 100 days, he implemented the New Deal, which provided support for Americans through a bunch of new organizations that were created that helped them. And it was like government-funded programs to create things like public infrastructure that would create more jobs. Hoover also started the Fireside Chats, which basically was when he went on the radio and just told citizens what was being done and why these policies were being initiated. And it was done to show that things are being done, things are actually happening. We are trying to solve the problem. Obviously, not the entire Great Depression wasn't solved all at once, but the fact that Americans now knew that things are trying to get done was really comforting. One of Roosevelt's things was implementing unemployment. He wanted unemployment. He thought that it was necessary, especially because how many people were unemployed, and that we needed the economy to start back up again. Another thing he implemented was the National Recovery Administration, which was supposed to help Americans recover, reform, and continue living on with their lives. However, eventually it was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court stated that it was an overreach of federal power, it conflicted with state governments, and that there was no clear directives, so it ended up deeming it unconstitutional. But Roosevelt had other initiatives such as Social Security, which helped vulnerable communities, and those things were very much liked. Basically, people invested in stocks using credit and hoped that they would be able to out profit the interest. That didn't end up working, and a lot of people lost all their money in the stock market crash. Then the banks were not getting their money back and canceled out the Dawes Plan, which just caused economic instability worldwide. Hoover didn't do much. Any little thing he did do went unnoticed, and everyone hated him. Franklin D. Roosevelt came into power, and he did a lot more to comfort Americans and provided a lot more direct aid in the form of unemployment and Social Security, which was liked by all Americans. And yeah, that was the stock market crash. So that was the U.S. going from World War I into